does a product go into that?
So I spend a lot of time a lot of time with commercial teams, a lot of time with research teams, making sure we got product development, what we need, and I'm basically selecting everything.
Did you turn it off?
What is it?
So I would assign seed.
Okay.
So that we got seed crop protection. This is I was on the seed side.
Gotcha.
But
Crop protection is
other side, yeah, basically that kind of stuff. Exactly.
that'd be audacious essentially.
Which is a pretty commoditized.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
It's the seed you got proprietary.
Right.
Those kind of programs.
Is it true? I've heard this, but I don't know. Is it true that you can't like refarm the same seed and go back next year and buy the new seed from the company and then the year after that? You couldn't from your crop and refarm those.
That's what we want everybody to believe because it's good for business.
I see. That's not really.
They're basically the way we for herbicide, we got licenses, so you can't do it because we've licensed to use that technology for years.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Welcome to Rev One Ventures, and welcome to our October Founder Story. These are monthly events that we have where we profile some of the great founders that we get to work with, where they share their firsthand insights into their journey building their companies. I'm Brian Helon. I am Executive Vice President of Investment Funds here at Rev One, and I'm fortunate to be here with Paul Matter. Paul's the co-founder and technology lead at two companies that he started, pH Matter and Power to Hydrogen. Welcome, Paul. Thanks for being here today and doing the founder story with us.
Thanks, sir.
All right. To get started, tell us a little bit about your background and journey from your undergraduate studies, your PhD studies, and your early career leading up to the founding of your first company, pH Matter.
Sure, yeah. So I definitely have a technical background. I got a PhD in chemical engineering from Ohio State. I actually even did my undergrad at Ohio State. So I was here for almost 9 years in Columbus, working on chemical engineering, studied fuel cell catalysts in grad school, which is definitely a hot topic at the time. A lot of development going on for fuel cells and hydrogen related to automotive applications. Kind of got actually exposed to Rev One Ventures Tech Columbus a little bit when I was in grad school. I took a class, it was Michael Camp's class on technology commercialization in grad school because I was always kind of interested in entrepreneurship even back then. But coming out of grad school, I ended up getting a job in Columbus at a company, Next Tech Materials, that did a lot of development and had a lot of government-funded projects related to materials for solid oxide fuel cells, and they're located just up in Lewis Center, just north of Columbus. And spent a lot of time there. My official role was a chemical systems engineer, but also got to lead R&D projects related to materials and systems, projects like the Navy, where we developed technologies for underwater vehicles, and projects for the National Science Foundation, and actually USDA, we're working on biofuels and catalysts that go into the processing of biofuels. So got a lot of good experience. Spent a lot of time writing proposals to get funding for these different projects that we were working on. So definitely have a good technical background and then some experience in industry working on things like proposals and development and new materials processes. So.
That's great. Really great background. I think we'll hit on more how some of those experiences, really benefited what we built with the two companies. But there's one thing about doing this technical work within the confines of an established company, pursuing grants and funding for that versus, going out on your own and started doing that. So what was the spark? Like what happened? What was sort of the moment of truth where you decided, hey, I've got a vision, I'm gonna build something, I'm gonna spin out of this, comfortable trajectory and, do something, independent?
Yeah, so in grad school, I was really interested in what we were working on back then. It was new materials to help fuel cells work better and last longer for automotive applications. I had a real passion for that, and I always sort of wanted to start my own company, but didn't really know how. And so working for another company, I got some of that experience writing proposals, and I went through, I think it was like the NSF I-Core program on all the projects, and kind of got more exposure to technical sales and that kind of side of the business. But it wasn't until, really, I think it was 2008, 2009, there was a financial crisis, and the Obama administration had the American Recovery Act came out, and so they were putting hundreds of millions of dollars into projects to scale up battery manufacturing for electric vehicles and biofuels production. And since I had some of these other projects, they selected me as a reviewer for that. And it was a paid and a part-time job, because these proposals were hundreds of pages long. But one of the requirements was you had to start your own company to be a reviewer on these projects. And that's actually how PH Matter was started. They required you to start a company in your name, and my name is Paul H. Matter, so I started a company and, basically went through all the government systems to get paid by the government. And so through that American Recovery Act work, I think the reason they did that is they wanted to show job creation with this funding, and even job creation for reviewers for the proposals. That's how PH Matter came to be, was from reviewing those proposals. And it gave me a nice, small amount of seed funding. I think I made about $10,000 or something like that reviewing these proposals, and used that to buy some equipment. And then I had someone who I worked with previously at Nextech, Crystal, who I'm sure we're going to talk about. He had also started his own company around the same time. We decided sort of to join forces. It was a good time. We had some equipment. I was already set up to get paid by the government, so we could start submitting proposals and things like that to get funding. And that's sort of what, how PH Matter came to be, and something I always wanted to do, but that's, the timing seemed right. That's why I jumped in.
That's really excellent. Yeah, definitely. We'll talk about your partnership with Chris over the years. But as you guys decided to join forces, to start, what became PH Matter, talk a little bit about the vision for the company. What was your initial focus? How were you leveraging your and Chris's expertise and kind of defining the strategy and where you thought you could create something meaningful there?
Yeah. So Chris had a background in electrochemistry and material science, and mine was more on the chemical engineering side, but I had some experience in fuel cell materials, and I really felt like, what we were working on in what I was working on in grad school, there was no one out there doing that commercially, and it felt like these materials would be very useful. Sort of the background for PH Matter, a lot of the fuel cell catalysts, people are using materials that were developed for other industries that have already been scaled up. They weren't using materials that were specifically tuned for that application, and that was something I knew how to do. And so that's what really led to our focus is, okay, let's make materials that are specifically designed to go into these different electrochemical applications, fuel cells and batteries. And with kind of his background in material science and scaling things up at Nextech Materials, my background in engineering and electrochemistry, that's kind of where we went down this direction of, and I feel like when we first started the company, we almost had this technology and we were looking for a fit for it. And so we kind of had a lot of different diverse projects we were working on where the thing in common was these set of materials, but it wasn't market focused until a few years down the road.
Yeah, definitely want to talk about translating technical products, technical innovation to market, but what a kind of segue from what you're describing there to kind of the genesis of power to hydrogen and how the idea for that company, you already were having some success, you were starting to identify some of these really meaningful commercial applications for what you were building on the material side of PH Matter, but then you guys had this concept around hydrogen. So talk a little about more how powered hydrogen came to be and how you made that decision, like, this is big enough to maybe a standalone venture on its own.
Yeah, definitely. So, PH Matter, we initially had a project. We were working with a company making hearing aid batteries, and they wanted to make them rechargeable. So we were doing a lot of work on that, tuning the materials for that application. And then basically this larger company, they cut all of their R&D, and we sort of had this technology, but now we didn't really have a customer for it. And right around that time, Department of Energy came out with an opportunity, a small business innovation research, and we were pretty well tapped into those opportunities from the Department of Energy. It was for basically a reversible fuel cell. So it's a fuel cell that could also act as an electrolyzer. We had already had the material sort of developed because it's very similar to what we're working on with the rechargeable battery. So we basically submitted a proposal to that, got it funded, and when we got into the project, we realized we had great materials, but the cell design that we were using, this conventional design, was really holding us back. And we were kind of under the gun to deliver certain milestones for the project. So sort of, we had to come up with an idea to how we make this work. And we, kind of put our heads together and came up with a new cell design to make these cells work with the materials, and submitted a patent on it and got that awarded. And initially we were thinking, hey, we got this patent on this unique cell design. Maybe that's something we can license. We're more a materials focused company, but we were having trouble. There wasn't much interest in licensing this new design until it had been demonstrated. And around that time, we got invited to participate in an accelerator called the H2 Refill program. And it was sponsored by Toyota and Shell, and they were really trying to spur the hydrogen industry and help out startups who were working in that space. And so they actually reached out to us, and I asked if we wanted to join the accelerator, and they're like, yeah, sure, this sounds great. And it was through the course of working in that accelerator that we saw, hey, this could be a huge opportunity, and we kind of got a better feel for how the hydrogen industry works and how we can work with these larger companies. But we realized, we're going to need to raise capital. We're even going to hire different, people than what we need for a materials company. This is going to be more of a systems company. We need electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, and so that's kind of what led to the decision. Like, this is probably a new venture, but it's a great opportunity. We've got a strong patent. Let's take a chance and let's not miss out on this. And that's what led to the formation of Powered Hydrogen.
That's great. So let's talk more about powered hydrogen. So you decided to spin it out. You think this is a big enough standalone opportunity, different in nature than what you guys were doing at PH Matter. So today, what does powered hydrogen seek to do? What's the technology it's developing? What's the application? Who's the customer?
Yeah, so hydrogen really fits well with renewable energy as you start to add more and more renewable energy to the electrical grid. Because when you do that, you get points in time where you have just excess electricity and there's nothing you can do with it, there's not enough storage for it. And so what electrolyzers do is they allow you to take that excess electricity and convert it into hydrogen, which can go into chemical processing, it can be used for long duration energy storage, it can be used to make fertilizer. There's a lot of applications for hydrogen, and it's a good way to take that excess renewable energy and give you something to do with it. So our product, it's really a containerized system that we sell to renewable energy developers, and it lets them do something useful when they have too much electricity from their renewable installation. And so, that's kind of the gist of it. Is really equipment sales to renewable energy developers, and it's something continue to grow. We're starting out now right at a smaller scale, but we're starting to get into larger and larger scale. Because eventually, a lot of these projects are hundreds of megawatts, really huge projects. So you gotta have to prove the technology out at a smaller scale until we can get up to that really large utility scale.
That's great. It's very exciting, the work that you're doing. So I want to talk more about kind of that bridge from the technology innovation to commercialization. So you're a technical founder, deep technical expertise, you and Chris kind of lead a lot of that innovation and development that's happening, in the companies. How did you think about, with power to hydrogen in particular, kind of bridging that gap from the bench to the commercial application to these types of customers that are working and have, excess and surge renewable energy production, and decide this is where this technology can be applied? How did you kind of go about validating that?
Yeah, sure. So we definitely, like I mentioned, at the time NSF, they called it the I-Core program. I'm not sure if it's something new now, but it's all about customer discovery. And like, we don't follow that process necessarily rigidly, but it is it's the customer discovery process of getting out there and talking to people in the industry and potential customers. And a lot of that happened through participation in accelerators. We did the H2 Refuel Accelerator, where we got to really get to know Toyota and Shell and how they work, but we participated in several other accelerators, some more specific to the electric utility industry. We went through the Free Electrons program, which AEP was a member of at the time, and they partnered with a lot of utilities all around the world. They don't compete against each other, so they're kind of pooling resources to help startups, and that got us a lot of good connections with these electric utilities. It got us to understand how they work and sort of what the process is to adopt new technology. And so it's through participation in those accelerators, and then also just talking to potential customers, understanding their problems, understanding the process, understanding their buying decisions. That's kind of what led us to come up with, okay, what's the plan, what's the path to get to full commercial scale installations. So it was really that process.
Yeah, I want to go deeper there. I think it's a really interesting lesson for some of the other founders that are building technical products. You guys were extremely thoughtful about where you spent your time in terms of the accelerators. You weren't doing like run-of-the-mill accelerators. You guys really focused in, leaned in on accelerators that were really tied to some of these potential industry partners in electrical utilities, Shell, etc. Talk a little about those experiences and how you both identified and then kind of got the most out of them, even parlay them into ongoing work with those industrial partners, even after those accelerators or competitions concluded.
Yeah, I think, it was actually, we hired an intern, a business intern through some Rev 1 funding that they had at the time. And one of their main roles is to identify what accelerators are out there in this industry and kind of come up with a list. And that's how we really got started on it. We started to applying to some of these accelerators. And then a lot of the accelerators, they're actually focused on, coming up with a plan, developing an idea for a pilot that you could do with utilities, and then trying to sell that idea to the members of the accelerator. And so that's kind of what we did in those accelerators, was develop our plan. Hey, we'd like to do this scale pilot first. It's going to be a small investment on your part, and then if it works, we work with the utilities to figure out what are the key performance indicators you need to show in the pilot, and if that works, that should lead to a bigger pilot, and that's kind of what we did. We basically did small pilots with a couple of different groups of utilities, and now that's led to bigger opportunities that we're working on now. So, but yeah, it really started with the work of an intern that was funded by Rev 1 and identifying those opportunities.
That's great. So you did these accelerators, you built some of these relationships, became partners from some of the early pilot work that you guys were doing as part of kind of technology development and go-to-market. As you were having those exploratory conversations, was what you were doing more completely disruptive, or were you actually more like incremental innovation around this problem was known, there was already the desire and need to kind of figure out what to do with the excess energy? So talk a little about that, disruption versus incremental innovation, and how that kind of informed how you talk to customers and really sold them on the value of what you guys could do.
That's a good question, because that was a lot of internal strategic discussion about what direction we go with the product. Because some ideas I would say were more creating a new market, versus some were a disruptive technology, but definitely different from anything that was out there. And I think it came down, we decided it was going to be very challenging to both come up with a new product and a new market at the same time. It was just like compounding risk, and we thought that was too much to do right out the bat. Like a good first step is, what's our minimal viable product? And it can't be something that's already on the market. There does have to be some unique features to it. And we decided that's, where we focus, but we didn't want to, shoot too high and make it super challenging for ourselves and try to create a new market with our first product. So that's sort of the strategy we've ended up going with, is a minimal viable product that has unique features that aren't out there on the market. And then from there, from that beachhead, we have a pathway to more advanced products and maybe even creating new markets as we grow. But that was kind of the thinking that went through and the strategy that we came up with while we were figuring out where we go first.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I'm lucky, I'm an insider. I get to serve on Paul's board, so I have some understanding of where that's going. I don't know if that's ready quite for prime time yet, but I think just being thoughtful about Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3, implications of the technology is something Paul and his team have been extremely thoughtful about. So let's talk a little bit about team. Heard this name, Chris Holt. So talk a little bit more about how you got to know Chris, how you came to work with Chris, how you decided in a bit of a moment, probably 10 years ago, 12 years ago now, to partner up with Chris, and how that partnership has really sustained incredibly effectively over these years.
Yeah, so Chris and I actually, I interned at Next Tech when I was in grad school, and I shared an office with him, so I got to know him really well from that and got along. And I think at the time when I was thinking about starting a company, I read a book, and like the most successful companies are usually when you partner with somebody you've already worked with, not a family member or a friend. And I knew Chris and I worked well together and got along. He had good complementary skills, and he had also already kind of decided to go off on his own and start a company. And so it really came down to like us getting together, having a beer at EW3s and saying like, why don't we join forces, and with your skills and my skills, we can really make things go. And that's what led to it. And as we got into it, we kind of made decisions about, like, we realized there's so many things that need to be done when you're starting up a company. And I forget how it happened, but he sort of became the CFO and more leading that side of the business. I stayed more on the technical side, and we kind of divided things up early, and I don't think there was a whole lot of thought into that at the time, other than I was like, I didn't want to have to deal with accounting, and it wasn't something I enjoyed, and he was willing to take it on. But yeah, so we worked well together and get along, and it's definitely paid off.
Yeah, could you elaborate on that just a little bit more, because you initially mentioned kind of the different technical skill sets you guys brought to the initial venture, PH Matter, but then you kind of started touching on business functional areas, responsibilities. So how are you guys running things today with the two businesses, and how have you kind of decided this is the right organizational structure across these two, high growth businesses?
Yeah, so since Chris had the materials background and I had previous experience with chemical systems engineering, that's how we kind of decided to split things a little bit, with him leading more of the PH Matter efforts focused on materials, and I'm leading the efforts at Power to Hydrogen. So that was kind of an easy, natural split, but definitely, both, I guess neither of us had a strong business background, so that's something where we had to look at hiring people to help out in certain areas. We finally have a real CFO now. I mean, not that Chris wasn't doing a good job that had a business training and background there, and we hired someone to lead commercial outreach and efforts with customers. So we've been able to hire in those areas as we grow, and that's helped the business kind of accelerate and move faster.
Yeah, build about that. In some of our previous founder stories, we talked about non-technical founders hiring and managing technical expertise. You guys kind of had the reciprocal of that as two very strong technical founders having to build this business management capability. within the team. So talk a little about that, like the CFO hire, on Alex Zoiger on the business development side. How did you guys think about designing those roles and really thinking about the skill set, experience that you were trying to really add to complement what you and Chris could do?
Yeah, I think, it was something we were kind of tried to take on some of those roles part-time. But it wasn't until we talked, one of our advisors, he kind of pushed us and said, I need to see your org chart and, where different people are in the organization. And so we kind of got together and did that, and it was like, kind of made us realize like how many different things all of us are doing, and as we grow, like, does it really make sense for, material scientists to be doing the financial statements and things like that? And, there's options out there, like, and, you get fractional CFOs, and I think once we kind of put things down on paper and saw the org chart, it made us realize where the holes were, and made us realize, like, yeah, this is something I'm doing, but I don't necessarily need to be doing this. I'm probably not the best person to be doing this, and that's probably a good spot where we need to hire somebody. Maybe it's fractional to start out with, but as we grow and get more funding, that could definitely be a full-time role. That's kind of how we went about it and identified, where the holes were in the organization, what we needed to fill.
So I didn't have this on my questions, but I think it is an important piece to talk about advisors and how you guys leverage some really wonderful advisors over the years, to help you think through organizational design, talent, go-to-market, et cetera. Talk about kind of the importance of advisors, and was there maybe one advisor in particular, that stood out, maybe on this, team development side, or perhaps another area of business that was particularly influential to how you and Chris were thinking?
Yeah, I would definitely say it kind of evolved a lot as the business grew. There were different advisors that helped more at different points in the business, especially kind of early on as we were developing the plan. It really helped to talk to some advisors who had kind of done it before, who had started a business from scratch and could help us. I think the most important thing is figuring out what's the next step, what are the high-level steps to get to where you want to go. And talking to somebody who's done it before, I think, was really valuable. And then as we started growing, advisors who had led big teams and had to go through hiring, they were able to really provide good advice along, how do we build a team, and how do we think about hiring. And I think we've got great advice from Rev 1 about the hiring process, and it's something we still use today. We have a bank of questions that you guys gave us that we should use in the interview process, and that's part of our kind of standard procedure now. It's like, look at the Rev 1 bank of questions and figure out, for this candidate, what questions we want to ask during the interview. So, yeah, but definitely leveraging advisors is very important because there's so many things that need to be done. And, particularly as a founder, we didn't have a lot of business experience, only the technical background. That was really important.
That's great. Thanks. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about kind of the financing strategy that you've used, in connection with building the companies. And I think one thing in particular that you guys have been very successful at is identifying and securing grant funding for the technical development work. And you've also been able to really translate that into commercial business development as well. So talk about kind of how you and Chris thought about financing the business, and with the lens of building highly technical products and companies is often very capital intensive, but I've always been very impressed. You guys have done that in an extremely capital efficient way. As we benchmark you guys against other hydrogen technology companies, materials companies, et cetera, you've just always been head and shoulders above. So what are some lessons learned for folks that might be building technical companies to do it in a capital efficient manner, live within your means, but still achieve some incredible milestones along the way?
Yeah, so I'd say, we've definitely leveraged, grants, small business innovation research grants and other grants a lot. We've always tried to look at it as wanting to have sort of this base load of funding to make sure things keep going, because it takes a long time, particularly if we're developing hardware or hard tech. It takes years to get to market. So we definitely we had previous experience writing proposals, so we kind of understood how it worked. But we've kept kept our eye on opportunities from NASA, Department of Energy, NSF, and basically taking advantage of those. It also, though, helps to really get to know decision makers there as well. Network with them at conferences and talk to them. They're more than willing to talk to people in industry. They actually are looking for ideas for proposal opportunities. They want to know what industry needs, what's missing, how can the government help. So, you can go and talk to them and say, hey, we think there's an opportunity here for a U.S. company to really evolve in this area, and it could, give the U.S. an advantage economically compared to competitors right now are mostly in Europe and Japan and China. And so, being able to sell that to them, like, hey, it's worth putting some funding into this, can create opportunities for yourself. You don't have to be just completely passive and wait for opportunities to come from the government. You can reach out and talk to people there and tell them what's needed. So that's something we've tried to do. But government funding by itself isn't enough. I mean, you can't usually spend a lot of those grants on equipment and marketing and some other, obvious expenses that you need to grow and commercialize the technology. So we have leveraged also, equity investment to go along with the government grants. And actually, they're really complementary because a lot of the government grant opportunities requires you to bring in matching funds, which can be equity funding. So getting some of that equity funding opens up the door for even more grants, and that's something we've done recently. Just within the last couple of months, we got a couple larger grants that we were only eligible for because we had equity funding that could provide cost share, and so that's helped us. That non-dilutive funding is kind of helps us not have to raise as much equity financing and not get diluted as much, which is good. But I think also having the grant funding looks attractive to many investors because, hey, we're putting $1 in, but the government's almost matching that dollar for dollar, so we're getting more for our investment. So.
No, it most certainly has been a really complementary kind of financing strategy between the public funding and then what private investors have brought. So that's a great kind of transition to the Series A round that Power to Hydrogen raised and how that had just a really impressive assortment of investors that you were able to really bring to the table, really building on kind of one thing we haven't touched too much on, kind of the international connectivity that you built for Power to Hydrogen, even in its kind of early days with the early partners and funding. But take us through kind of the process, the Series A round, the type of investor syndicate you built, how you thought about kind of designing this optimal syndicate, told the story, and really pulled together an impressive round in not terribly great conditions to raise capital.
Yeah, I think, kind of how things got started was we went through one of these accelerators, did a small pilot, and we had a group of electric utilities who could also be customers want to do a larger pilot, and they agreed to fund it with basically a safe note, that would convert to equity on the next round. So once we had that, we were able to kind of go to investors like, hey, we've got these potential customers, big, well-known electric utilities, they're going to be on the cap table. And I think that drove a lot of interest in investors, and it led to, even bigger names and bigger companies wanting to be a part of the round, and things kind of grew. And then around the same time where we were going through that raise, we also found out we got a big amount of funding from the Department of Energy coming in, and that, the investment could be leveraged with that. And I think that's what really kind of sealed the deal. But it started with an accelerator, a small pilot that was successful, and then grew to a larger pilot with the state node, and kind of escalated all the way to being able to close the equity financing Series A just last July. So so now we were able to close it despite not maybe the best market conditions, but I think we're well positioned now and growing fast.
I want to dig a little deeper into the composition of this syndicate and just say that I know one thing that one thought was incredibly powerful in the story for Power to Hydrogen was this consortium of 4 electrical utilities that not only invested, but really had devoted resources for this initial 10 kilowatt, pilot. So you had some really powerful early technical validation, at least at that level of scale, and a tremendous amount of global utility interest supporting that, financially with investment as well as with resources to execute upon the pilot. Thought that was a really powerful piece of the equation. But then, as we were going through the fundraising, it was awesome. As a lead investor in the round, there's nothing better than when the company you have the lead term sheet issued to is calling, emailing you every day. Yeah, I need you to talk to this investor. I need you to talk to this investor. These weren't just random investors. These were powerful global companies in the hydrogen industry. So talk a little about that, because that's a really tremendous accomplishment for a hard tech company in Columbus, Ohio, to attract this investor syndicate. So we've publicly announced some of those investors, but give some of those examples, how you build those relationships and really compel them. And I'll pile on with some embellishments as well.
Yeah, it definitely helps. We originally participated in one of the accelerators because AEP, had some contacts there, and that led to this introduction to these other utilities in Europe. And when we got into that, we realized, in Europe was really where hydrogen was taking off much faster, because they were looking at it at the time. There's a lot of natural gas coming into Europe from Russia, and they wanted to get away from that as quickly as possible. There was more political motivation to switch from like a natural gas-based kind of power source to hydrogen. And so that, got us tied in with some utilities that wanted to move very quickly and were well known throughout Europe. So, once we had them involved and, they were, making announcements about, we plan to do gigawatts of hydrogen production, which, is billions of dollars of electrolysis installation. That really got, the attention of other potential partners. So we kind of had the customers, the electric utilities in line first, but then it was, people who could provide components that could attach to our systems and, other potential users of hydrogen, were interested in what we were doing and wanted to be a part of it. So I think, it really kind of started with Accelerator, but we identified that Europe was probably a good first location. Even though we're in the United States, like things were just moving so fast there. It's like we have to try to do pilots in Europe, even though there is that barrier of traveling across the ocean, but it's the best opportunity for us.
Yeah, and I think we at Rev One leading this round, we're really fortunate. We've got a partnership with Worthington Enterprises, Michael Liu here today, our key business partner on that endeavor, and having Worthington alongside Rev One on calls with investors, talking about the technology, the merits. Worthington Enterprise saw as a large industrial company, Rev One, our experience putting some of these financings together in the Midwest. We really couldn't have had, I think, a better foundation to be supportive of a great founder like Paul, in pulling that financing together. So use of funds, what are you building? You raised a significant amount of capital. What are you building? Where are you building it? What will it prove?
Yeah, so the main focus right now is building a full commercial scale module, which we're going to be installing at the Port of Antwerp in Belgium. And so the reason we decided on that is a good central location for a lot of European utilities that we're working with. But also right now, more than half of the natural gas that goes into Europe flows through the Port of Antwerp, and they're very motivated to transition that to hydrogen. They already have hydrogen pipelines that run from the port all the way to industrial sites in northern Germany, and there's a number of users within the port for hydrogen. So they were very interested in doing a pilot with a new technology that could pair directly with renewables and generate hydrogen that could feed into their market and their pipelines. So we were lucky to find an opportunity there. They liked the fact that these utilities were involved, and so our biggest focus right now is just scaling up the technology to this commercial scale, demonstrating this pilot. We're also, though, working on the manufacturing side. Right now, we make most of the parts for the system kind of in a lab. So a lot of the funding is going towards pilot scale manufacturing, and we're really trying to leverage the automotive industry that's here in the Midwest. There's a lot of equipment from suppliers out there where they're looking to retool it to use something that's going to be a growing market, because, for instance, we're working with like companies that make engine gasket seals for diesel engines, and they're worried about that market going away with all this electrification. But that same equipment, it can be used to make parts that go into our electrolyzers. So working with companies like that so that we can make parts, at scale and economically is the other big focus. So it's kind of manufacturing and then also the full commercial scale demonstration of the tech.
I mean, that's awesome, and I think it showed the reach of a company like Power to Hydrogen in terms of not just kind of transforming an industry, but taking, advantage of electrical utility here that's innovative, Worthington Enterprises, this interest in hydrogen, and then really helping transform industry capacity, to support a transition to different energy sources. So it's awesome. It's exciting for us at Rev One to be, a small part of this journey. So I always like to wrap up with kind of the biggest lesson you've learned in building, the company so far. So what would you tell yourself or warn yourself about if you could go back to when you and Chris were at BW3s, having a beer and figuring out how to create new companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were a little naive about how much work and how long it was going to take to do things. I don't know if I want to tell myself that back then. I might, scare my old self away. But I think it's, at the end of the day, it's really about figuring out like what are the steps to get to where you want to go, and it starts figuring out high-level steps. But it's also very important figuring out like what's the next step that we can tackle and we should be focused on. So I think that's really important. And one thing we've kind of learned over the years is like you can't do it all yourself. So you need to find the right people to help you get to that next step. And identifying the people you need to hire and then identifying the right person for that position, I think is very important. And it's something we didn't have any training on at the time. So, hiring people and growing, that's the most important thing. I mean, that's where most of the funding is going towards, is paying people salaries. And it's also, when you don't have the right person, it's maybe where most of the mental anguish and wasted time goes towards. So I think that's very important. I wish I would have, maybe spent more time like learning how to interview people or learning psychology. I think would have been, a good skill to have back in school. But that's what I'd say it comes down to, is figuring out the next steps and figuring out the right people to help.
That's great, Paul. Thank you so much. So I really had a lot of fun asking Paul questions this morning, but definitely want to give the audience a chance to ask some questions. So my good colleague Giselle will be around. Do you have a question?
Good morning, Paul. Thank you for sharing your story. When you generate hydrogen, what is the raw material? I understand there's different kind of hydrogen, blue hydrogen, green. Can you talk about that?
Yes,
That's
sorry.
a follow-up question.
Yeah, we generate green hydrogen. So it's basically we're taking water and electricity and then splitting the water into the hydrogen and oxygen. And then the hydrogen, can be used as a fuel. It can replace other sources of hydrogen. Like most of the fertilizer today is made from natural gas generated hydrogen. So that's probably the biggest potential application for it. But it could also be used to make steel, other chemicals, lots of applications. But it all starts with water and electricity.
Thank you for clarifying. The reason I asked you to one of your partners was Shell. That's why I asked that question. And I have a follow-up question. And that is, today, what are your top two challenges moving forward? I think I heard you saying finding the right advisors and making the next plan, but what else is your top two challenges as you continue this journey and are ready to produce a product and offer it to the market as a unit?
I mean, immediately right now, we've got funding in and we're really trying to grow the team, and that's challenging to find people that fit specifically what you're looking for. We have some openings that are very specific positions. We're starting to, for the first time, rely on even recruiters to help, but managing them is also a challenge. So that's one thing. I would also say, there's a lot as we go to scale up. Technical challenges are just, really, it's not stuff that can't be overcome, but it's keeping things on schedule. We got so many different moving parts that, you know, some days it's just hard to keep track of everything. And so, yeah, really working hard to try to keep things on schedule is what I fight every day, I feel like, when I'm in the office.
Any other questions? Yes, we're okay.
All right. Well, that was good for our October Founders Story. Personally, I'm just very proud of, you know, Powered Hydrogen and Progenitor, pH Matters, Evolution, and thank you so much, Paul, for sharing the story today. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Hi, Michael.
How you doing? One of those days. One of those days. Like,
Weeks.
huh?
One of those weeks.
Yeah, I was looking at my calendar. I did not have this on my calendar. I don't know why. It was supposed to be on my calendar. I was like, I looked at your agenda. I was like, oh, fuck. It's. I had to drive over here.
Well, yeah, sorry, I probably should have forwarded it to you. But
No. It was. I knew about it. I just for some reason I didn't put it on my calendar. It is what it is.
it is what it is.
Okay.
Dewey, is your thing still on?
Thank you so much.